What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I've been sharing some of the wildest ones I've found. And if you'd like a full episode on this, I did one on the podcast. So this one comes from a Reddit user who said that right before their grandmother passed away at 98 years old, she confessed to her family that they were actually her second family. But it gets worse. It turned out that previously she had been married to an abusive man and had 2 kids with him. But one night she came home and she just had enough. She took the kids, she shot her husband, and she burned the whole house down. But she left her 2 kids at an orphanage and ran off to start a new life. This came as a total surprise to her family. She said that she had always wished she was able to find the 2 children and explain to them what had happened. But tragically, she passed away a few days later.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. This video shows the last living polio survivor from the 1950s, Paul Alexander. He still uses his iron lung all day, every day. There are spiders that capture bats and large birds and eat their living bodies. Llama spit is actually projectile vomit. You never stop seeing. When your eyes are closed, you're actually just looking at your eyelids. And now, your eyes are closed. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Being the second most fragile organ in your body, a single punch can completely rupture your liver. A study conducted over several years found that the TSA failed to catch 95% of guns, drugs, and other illegal paraphernalia going through airports. Selfies that were taken seconds before death, Part 2. Businessman Gia Lajuna attempted to take a selfie with a 1.5-ton walrus at a zoo in China. After climbing into the enclosure, the walrus grabbed him from behind, dragged him underneath the water, drowning him in a matter of minutes. Chinese daredevil Wu Yongjing was an Instagram celebrity best known for taking selfies on top of skyscrapers. While trying to take a selfie on top of a skyscraper in 2017, he lost his grip, falling 62 stories to his death. In 2014, during Spain's annual Running of the Bulls event, 32-year-old David Gonzalez decided to stop and take a selfie in front of 2 bulls that were colliding behind him. All of a sudden, a third bull that he didn't see came from his side and gored him to death.
Okay, let's talk about the details because I know you're all dying to know. In 2014, 22-year-old Marissa Mowry AR'd an 11-year-old boy and got pregnant with his child. Prosecutors said that Marissa took advantage of the boy 15 times over several months before getting pregnant. When the child was born, the mother of the victim believed that the baby belonged to Marissa's boyfriend, but that wasn't the case. Around 3 years later, the boy, who is now around 15 years old, tells his mother what really happened. They were obviously in disbelief, so they did a DNA test, and it did turn out that he was the father of this child. 5 years later, Marissa is now 28 years old. She was arrested and was facing life in prison, but she took a plea deal and is now only serving 20 years. And what's gross is that Marissa tried to claim that the boy forced himself on her. But after a phone call that she had with the boy that police were recording revealed that she was lying.
So another body has been found in Lady Bird Lake. This is now the 4th man aged 30 to 40 pulled from the lake this year. And many people are claiming they can see patterns in the men being found in the lake, causing people to wonder if it's a serial killer. I just did a podcast episode breaking this all down, but here's some of what we know. So in 2018, these men were 3 of the 6 bodies recovered from bodies of water in downtown Austin. The police ruled that there was no foul play, but all 3 men were seen in the 2 popular bar areas in Austin, 6th Street and Rainey. And in an article from 2019, ER doctors were saying that they were seeing a lot of people coming in after being drugged in these 2 neighborhoods. And as of now, we know that 3 of the 4 men who died in Lady Bird Lake this year were seen in those 2 neighborhoods the night before. The other one is still inconclusive. If you have any information, you can contact the Austin Police Department, and if you know anyone in Austin or anyone traveling to Austin, you can let them know what's going on so that everyone can look out for each other.
This podcaster was murdered after being stalked for several months. 33-year-old Zohre and her husband Mohammed were murdered in their own home in Redmond, Washington after 38-year-old Rahman broke in and shot them. Rahman found Zohre on a podcast app called Clubhouse. They befriended each other through a chat group where they talked about job opportunities in the tech industry. This is where Rahman's obsession began, and Zohre began to feel uncomfortable when she started receiving about 100 messages a day. Ramin began showing up at her house several times during the week. He started following following her in public. He left gifts in front of her door and even threatened to burn her house down. Zohreh contacted police in December to get a restraining order, but it was difficult for authorities to serve the restraining order to Ramin because they couldn't locate him since he lived in Texas. On the day of the murder, at 1:45 a.m., Ramin broke in through Zohreh's window and he first saw Zohreh's mother. She was able to run out and go to the neighbor's house and call police. But at that point, it was too late. He gunned down Zohreh and her husband Mohammed and then took his own life.
This is why you shouldn't go out exploring at night. Popular urban exploration YouTuber Urbex Hill was out exploring one night for a video near a dark, abandoned tunnel. Everything was going alright until he encountered this. As you can see, two things seem to peer out from the corner and stare at him before running away. It's hard to tell what these things are as it's dark, but they appear to be very tall, skinny-looking creatures of some kind. So what do you guys think? Was this two strange-looking people in a dark tunnel at night? Or could these have been some sort of creature? Maybe a skinwalker? Let me know in the comments down below.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 5. This is the Dry Bones game, and it involves summoning a demon that will kind of play the game of tag with you. You will need a bathroom with a mirror, some matches, and make sure nobody else is home with you. It also must be 12:01 at night when you start the game, and all electronic devices must be turned off. Make sure all your lights are turned off and then light your match. Now imagine something you want and say, "I am aware of your presence. And I welcome you into my home, but not my body. Come now." If your match lasts more than 15 seconds, he is pleased with you. And you may continue. Now go to the largest room in your house. And this next part can take 5 minutes or 5 hours, so you have to be patient. When he is ready, you will hear a very low unearthly moan and a lot of pressure around your body, and at this point, you must go hide. You must also hide quickly and quietly because he is looking for you. You must remain hidden until 3 a.m. and if he finds you before then, he will take you and do whatever he wants to you. But if he doesn't find you by then, you will get whatever your mind imagines. And whatever you wanted will be waiting for you the very next morning.
A 38-year-old teacher has been accused of raping a 12-year-old student, and to make this situation even worse, she's allegedly pregnant with his child. 5th grade teacher Alyssa McCommon was arrested in September after she was accused of raping a student at her home in 2021. Alyssa, who is married and has 2 tween children of her own, reportedly befriended multiple children through video games before connecting with them on social media. Law enforcement has even accused her of allegedly creating a code word for the children to use so they could indicate they were alone so that she could allegedly send them nude photographs via Snapchat. She was released on a $25,000 bond, but then arrested again after law enforcement says she violated the terms of her bail agreement by allegedly reaching out to a 12-year-old victim on Snapchat. In court, prosecutors played a secretly recorded phone call between the teacher and the alleged 12-year-old father of her baby. In the phone call, she tells her alleged victim that she's pregnant with his child, that she would love and raise the baby, but for him not to tell anyone. She's facing charges of child rape, coercing a witness, and aggravated stalking and harassment, and she's due back in court in November.
This man claims that his grandma texted him from the afterlife. On 29th October of 2022, my maternal grandma passed away after her health rapidly declined due to cancer. She passed away in the living room on her hospital bed, surrounded by my mother and great aunt who had been caring for her. Since she lived in a council house in the UK, our family had to clear the house before returning it to the council. My mother took charge of handling her will, banking matters, and tying up loose ends. As part of this process, she held onto my grandma's phone in case any of her friends contacted us. Although we didn't expect much, as my grandma led a somewhat of a solitary life. On October 31st, my mother had taken a few days off work to sort through some of her mother's belongings in the house. That day, she received a text on my grandma's phone that said, "I have passed on from this life." My mother felt a sinking feeling in her stomach upon reading it. When she told me, I was in disbelief. Things like this always intrigued me, but I never thought I would get to experience this. The phone number didn't belong to anyone in our family, and when we tried calling it, there was no answer or voicemail.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard is getting out of prison. The child abuse victim who had her abusive mother murdered will be paroled on December 28th. Gypsy Rose is famously believed to be a victim of what used to be known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. For her entire life, Gypsy's mom Dee Dee had her and everyone else around her convinced that Gypsy had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, sleep apnea, learning disabilities, fatal allergies, hearing problems, eye problems, you name it. And she had her medically treated for all of these ailments that were fake. Gypsy didn't know how old she was. She used a wheelchair. She ate through a feeding tube, had all of her teeth pulled, and her head was shaved so it looked like she was going through chemotherapy. Gypsy only realized what was going on when she was in her late teens, and she believed the only way out was to kill her mom. Gypsy convinced her secret boyfriend, Nick, to do the deed. She brought a knife, gave it to him, and then hid in the bathroom so she couldn't see or hear the murder happening. Nick stabbed Dee Dee in the back 17 times while she slept. And afterwards, he and Gypsy went to the room next door and had sex. Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She will have served 85% of that sentence when she's paroled. Even after all this time, I'm still wondering who the villain and the victim is in the story.
This man killed his entire family when he was younger, and now he's a college professor. On August 4th, 1967, 15-year-old James Gordon Walcott grabbed a .22 long-barrel rifle and killed his father, mother, and 17-year-old sister in cold blood. When asked what drove him to pull the trigger, Walcott told the investigators that he hated his family. The teenager claimed he was tired of his mother's loud chewing, his sister's bad accent, and his father's disapproval of Walcott's anti-war views. The 15-year-old felt as though his family was conniving against him to drive him out of his mind. At the end of the 6-month trial, the jury acquitted Walcott by reason of insanity, and he was admitted into Rusk State Hospital on February 2nd, 1968, where he spent 6 years. 2 years after his release from the hospital, James Walcott legally changed his name and vanished. Nearly 40 years later, James Walcott resurfaced as an award-winning professor of psychology. In 1976, after changing his name to James St. James, the teenager went on to earn a PhD in psychology and joined the Millikan University in Illinois. Described as an older hippie by his colleagues, St. James has now been teaching at Millikan for over 30 years and won the college's Teaching Excellence and Leadership Award in 1997. Soon after, Dr. St. James was offered the position of chairman at the Department of Behavioral Sciences. After learning about the professor's dark past, the local officials, including the mayor of Decatur, were calling for his removal, but still the university stood by St. James's side and refused to let him go. To this day, Dr. James St. James remains the chair of Millikan's Behavioral Science Department, and his experimental psychology classes continue to receive positive reactions on social media.
This teenager became concerned for her ex and tried to help him. Little did she know she was about to be brutally killed. Lauren Astley was 18 years old from Wayland, Massachusetts. She began dating Nathaniel Fujita when the pair were in high school together. Nathaniel was a popular football player. The pair were described as being quite on and off. On the 1st of April 2011, she decided to end the relationship with Nathaniel. However, it did not go down very well at all, and his friends reported that he became depressed and withdrawn. He stopped doing things he used to enjoy doing, and he just didn't seem to care about life anymore. In summer 2011, the pair attended the same graduation party. It was reported that at the party, Nathaniel got quite jealous of when Lauren was talking to other boys. Nathaniel got quite drunk, and Lauren's mum was actually at the party, and Lauren ran up to her crying. She said that Nathaniel wouldn't leave her alone and was harassing her. Now, Nathaniel got so angry at this party that he punched the tent that everybody was in and caused it to collapse. He was then asked to leave the party. It was reported that Nathaniel started drinking quite heavily and becoming even more depressed. His mum actually got so worried about him that she reached out to Lauren. She asked Lauren if she could help and maybe speak to him, and Lauren agreed because she was concerned. Lauren agreed to chat to him and meet him at his house on the 3rd of July 2011. Tragically, she had no idea she would not leave the house alive. She texted him stating "here" and entered the house at approximately 7:05 p.m. Nathaniel lured her into the garage, slit her throat and strangled her with a bungee cord. He then drove her car to Town Beach and disposed of the keys down a drain. After running home, he put her body in his car and dumped her in a secluded area nearby. Obviously, Lauren's family got really concerned when she didn't get home. Nathaniel, as obviously the last person she was meeting up with, was reported as a suspect. Police found bloodstains in his garage and a big bag full of clothes soaked in blood. Lauren's body was found not long after. Nathaniel's defense in court stated that he was suffering a massive depressive episode and therefore should not be held criminally responsible. However, luckily he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
Murdered by an online predator, 14-year-old Carly Ryan thought that she was talking to a teenage boy online. In reality, she was being catfished by a 50-year-old serial paedophile intent on murder. Carly was a 14-year-old fun-loving Australian teenager when she started chatting to who she thought was an 18-year-old boy called Brandon Kane. They had a similar taste in music and immediately hit it off. She'd spoken to him on the phone and online, and this went on for 18 months. Only Brandon Kane didn't actually exist. All that time, Carly had actually been chatting to 50-year-old Gary Newman. In January 2007, Gary travelled from Melbourne posing as Brandon's father Shane to attend Carly's 15th birthday party. He said that Brandon couldn't make it but had sent her a gift. This gift turned out to be lingerie and a nurse's outfit. During the party, Gary's behaviour towards Carly became really inappropriate and he was asked to leave by Carly's mother. The month after, Gary travelled back to Adelaide, this time with his actual son, posing as Brandon. They convinced Carly to meet up with them at a beach in Port Elliot. She told her mum she was going to a sleepover, and she was never seen alive again. On arriving at the beach, Carly was attacked by Gary while his son watched. She was beaten mainly to the head and face, suffering 19 separate injuries. She was then suffocated with beach sand being stuffed in her nose and mouth, and she was then thrown in the sea and left to drown. Carly's body was found the next morning, floating face down in shallow water. Police immediately started looking at CCTV, and Carly was spotted with two men who'd arrived in a pale blue car. That car was tracked back to Gary Newman. Gary and his son were quickly detained, and the police searched his house. They found a notebook with Gary's handwriting detailing over 200 online personas. They also found evidence of other attempts at grooming children, and Gary was actually chatting at that moment to another teenage girl, arranging to meet up with her. In January 2010, Gary Newman was found guilty of Carly's murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 29 years. Gary's son, who'd witnessed the murder but not taken part, was cleared of all charges.
This is the mysterious case of the teenager who was found dead in a walk-in freezer. Kanika Jenkins was 19 years old and from Chicago. On September the 8th, 2017, she headed out with some friends. She told her mum that her friends were going with her to go bowling and then to watch a film. However, Kanika actually went to a party at Crown Plaza Hotel in Rosemont. CCTV captured the group of friends entering at around 1 a.m. During the party, the teenagers were posting on Snapchat and Facebook. At 1:30 a.m, Kanika texted her sister and would never speak to her again. It was at around 3 a.m. that the girls decided to leave the party. They got down to the lobby of the hotel, but Kanika actually realised she'd left something behind. Now, it's disputed where the girls actually left Kanika, but they went back up to the hotel room to get the item, and Kanika was left wandering the halls on her own. They were gone for between 10 and 20 minutes, and Kanika vanished. The friends searched the hotel but couldn't find her anywhere. At around 4:30 a.m, the friends called Kanika's mum. They had wondered if she'd gone back to her mum's house, but she hadn't. They admitted to Kanika's mum that they'd all been drinking. When Kanika's mum actually asked for help from the hotel, they refused and they wouldn't look at the CCTV footage. Shortly after 7 a.m, with no sign of Kanika, her mum Teresa reported her missing. The investigation began at around 1:15 p.m. on September 9th. Staff at the hotel said the CCTV footage showed them nothing. Police search of the hotel was also unsuccessful. However, at around 10 p.m, the police reviewed the CCTV and disturbingly they saw Kanika on film stumbling around the hallway. It then showed her walking through the kitchen towards the double freezer. Although it was not captured on CCTV, it's thought that she opened the door, walked in and got trapped. She was tragically found deceased inside of the freezer on September 10th. Strangely, she was found with one shoe off. Police stated they did not suspect foul play and her death was ruled an accident. However, Kanika's family was suspicious. Some speculated online that maybe friends or people at the party had something to do with her death. However, CCTV didn't capture any evidence of this. Others believed that the hotel had something to do with it and covered it up. In 2018, Kanika's family filed a $50 million lawsuit against the hotel. This was for not properly securing off the kitchen area from guests. They have apparently reached an agreement in this case, but details haven't been disclosed.
This woman was forced to lure her best friend to her sister's flat, knowing that she'd been murdered the second she arrived. Elisa Frank had also just watched as her sister had been murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Elisa had met Ahmad Otak at a children's home in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. He said that his parents had been murdered and he'd been forced to flee Afghanistan and move to the UK as a teenager. Elisa and her younger sister Kim had been taken into care after their father left and their mother became unable to cope. But Kim was soon sent to live with a family in Wales and Elisa began suffering with depression after being separated from her sister. Ahmad was quick to comfort Elisa and they soon began a relationship. After leaving the care system, they moved in together, but it wasn't long before he became extremely controlling of Elisa. He told her she wasn't allowed to speak to other men, he told her what to wear, and she was forced to walk behind him in public. He also cut her off from her friends, saying that they were bad influences. Two of these bad influences happened to be her best friend Samantha and her sister Kim, who'd recently moved back to Wakefield. When Ahmad became violent with Elisa, she did try to end the relationship, but he threatened to throw acid in her face and petrol bomb her mum's house. In February 2012, Ahmad's violence stepped up and he held a knife to Elisa's throat while he raped her. He said if she screamed, he'd sew her mouth shut. She did manage to flee after this attack and she went to her sister's flat. He began to bombard her with texts and phone calls, and she said that the relationship was over. Elisa's best friend Samantha actually did report Ahmad to the police and also to the UK Border Agency, but no action was taken as Elisa didn't want to make a statement. Around a month later, Ahmad agreed to bring some of Elisa's things to Kim's flat, and they agreed to let him in, but when he did come in, he launched a frenzied attack on Kim. He stabbed her over and over in front of her terrified sister. He then began laughing, licked the blood from the knife, and spat on Kim's dead body. He then forced Elisa to ring her best friend Samantha and tell her to come to the flat. She said that she hoped she'd have been able to tell by her shaky voice that something was wrong and she might get help, but she arrived at the flat alone. Ahmad answered the door and immediately began stabbing Samantha, a total of 34 times. Elisa was tied up by this point and could do absolutely nothing while she listened to her best friend's screams. He then dragged Samantha's body into the living room and dropped her at Elisa's feet, right next to Kim's body. He then forced Elisa into Samantha's car and drove to Dover in a bid to flee to France. Elisa managed to escape thanks to a passerby that saw the knife. He grabbed the knife from Ahmad and told Elisa to run. Ahmad was arrested and he actually tried to pin the murders on Elisa. She too was arrested and it took 3 days of questioning before she was finally released. Ahmad Otak was charged with 2 counts of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years. Elisa still struggles with nightmares about the murders and she spent months in hospital after the attack. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder. Elisa went on to write a book dedicated to her sister and she vows to keep going, as difficult as life is without her best friend and sister in it.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? Look at that.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Hazlitt Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know. This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Telma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband, Kevin, wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial.